board game Monopoly has been around for a very long time, and American families still love playing it, even if it can drag on too long, earning the nickname monotony. But the game has a remarkable history that reaches back to the early 20th century. David Begnaud is here with that story. Good morning, David.
Vanita, good morning. The history is legendary. The Beatles played Monopoly in a New York hotel room on their first U.S. tour. The game was even used to smuggle money and maps to POWs during World War II. And it turns out the game's history is scandalous, and today's version is nothing like what it was meant to be.
This is $800 rent instead of $330 rent.
It's a Tuesday morning in Southern California, and Timothy Vandenberg, the second-ranked competitive Monopoly player in the country, is using the game to teach math to his sixth grade class.
She's at like 38 away.
But his tips are the tools that every Monopoly player should know.
Number one, the oranges are king, but anything could win except for the browns. Number two, build to the 3-house level. That's when you get your best return on investment. And number three, think ahead. Now that's a major life skill we want our children and adults these days. Plan ahead. Now you want to build.
It's ironic that Vandenberg uses the board game to educate, because that is exactly what it was created for, before it became an American icon.
Come on, let's play Monopoly.
If Monopoly had a detective token, it would go to Mary Pallon.
Connecticut Avenue, $120, I'm totally buying it.
Part journalist, part sleuth, Pallon exhausted 5 years researching the game's origin.
I set out to find out the truth about Monopoly, and I didn't know where that was going to take me.
Her findings are revealed in The Monopolists: obsession, fury, and the scandal behind the world's favorite board game.
I, like most people, thought that Monopoly was invented during the Great Depression. I, like a lot of people, had heard this story that a man invented it. His name was Charles Darrow, sells it to Parker Brothers, rags to riches, Cinderella story, all is great. The problem is that's not exactly true.
The truth, Pallon discovered, is that a woman, Elizabeth McGee, invented the game in 1903 as a protest against big money of the Gilded Age.
The Carnegies, the Rockefellers, the Vanderbilts, the Morgans of the world. There was an amount of wealth being created in this country that was concentrated among a few people that we had never really seen before. So she makes a board game as a teaching tool to try and teach about the evils of Monopoly.
She called her square board, complete with a go-to-jail space, the landlord's game. How did it get away from her?
So it gets a little complicated. She patents her game in 1904, and it spreads as a folk game. It goes viral, like turn-of-the-century style. It's played in Boston, in New York, in Philly, and as people are playing it, they're making the board their own.
By the early 1930s, the Quakers of Atlantic City renamed spaces on the board with iconic properties like Boardwalk and Park Place. By then, the entire game had changed. So who came up with that name Monopoly?
When Lizzie McGee creates the landlord's game, she talks in her rules extensively about monopolies and anti-monopolies. So it's not long, almost immediately after, people start calling it the Monopoly game.
It was the height of the Great Depression when an unemployed Philadelphia man named Charles Darrow discovered the already popular game through a friend of his. He made his own version, and on March 19, 1935, he sold the rights to a game maker.
This is the original game that Charles Darrow gave to Parker Brothers.
Hasbro's Vice President of Gaming Marketing, Jonathan Berkowitz, showed us this version, printed on the back of a tablecloth, displayed at the company's headquarters in Pawtucket, Rhode Island. Parker Brothers was acquired by Hasbro in 1991. This week, company executives, right alongside Mr. Monopoly, celebrated the 80th anniversary of Darrow's game by ringing the closing bell at the NASDAQ.
Over 1 billion people have played Monopoly around the world. It's in 114 countries and 47 different languages. So it's a very, very global game.
Hasbro acknowledges that Monopoly was inspired by Lizzie McGee. But since her death, her story has largely been lost to history. Charles Darrow is the one who rolled the dice and got all of the credit. When he becomes a millionaire, does anyone say, hey, by the way, a woman is the one that started all this?
Right. Lizzie McGee actually herself speaks out, and she does these 2 interviews, one with the Washington Post and one with the Washington Evening Star. She holds up her boards, her early games, and the Monopoly board and says, hey, you know, I was around a long time before.
Does she get the credit then?
By then, the Darrow Cinderella story was so wrapped up in the craze in the game. It was so much part of the enchantment of the marketing of Monopoly. It doesn't seem to really go anywhere.
Monopoly historian and former Parker Brothers executive Phil Orbanes says the company paid Lizzie McGee $500 for the rights to the Landlord's Game. And they even put her face on the cover.
Game inventors just didn't get that in 1935. She died in 1948, and up and through, during her entire lifetime, she and Darrow were given joint credit for the idea behind Monopoly. After she passed away, then yes, she was forgotten.
Today, Monopoly is a real sport. The Emmy Award-winning documentary Under the Boardwalk profiles players in the highly competitive U.S. Monopoly Championship. Players like Tim Vandenberg, who's now using the game as Lizzie McGee would have wanted, as a tool to teach, minus the Monopoly.
What do you think it says that the game as it is today is the exact opposite of what Lizzie McGee wanted it to be?
Be careful what you put out there. It might come back to haunt you. It promoted what she hated.
And many people may not know that in the 1970s, a San Francisco State professor named Ralph Ansbach sued Parker Brothers for the right to make his game anti-monopoly. He won. And over the 10 years the court battle went on, Lizzie McGee's story was finally told on the record.
Fascinating. I love the fact that there are ranked Monopoly players.
Absolutely. And the tip here, they say, the game should take you no longer than an hour. If it takes longer than an hour, you're not following the rules.
Can't say I'm surprised the woman came up with it.